I'm Steve. I run tech recruiting at Blue Apron. I've been there for a little over 3 years. So anyway, I'm going to talk about your job search. There's no shortage of clickbaity articles out there that talk about this. So I was trying to provide a little bit of insight into less explored areas and some perspective that maybe cuts against the grain a little bit. So I broke this down into 3 areas: identifying and preparing for the job that you want, navigating the process, the interview process, and then maximizing your leverage in negotiations. So first off, when you're trying to figure out where you want to go and what the job is that you want, think about what's important to you in your next role. I laid out a lot of areas here. You might want to rank them, and then also just decide like what's important, what are you going to negotiate on, what are non-starters, you have to have it. So maybe you're going to flex on product a little bit because it's got a really great culture and this company has a great career growth. Maybe you're just looking to get in an early stage startup that has like high upside. So you're going to flex a little bit on the role because you know things are going to change over time. So think about what's important to you there, and then you can go from there. So that's actually the easier part, is to figure out what's important to you. The harder part after you've identified what you want is actually like finding the opportunity. So I put a couple of resources up here. A lot of things that people already know, Crunchbase. I thought the Inc. 5000 was really interesting, just an annual list of the 5,000 fastest growing companies, private US companies, and it captures growth. So a lot of smaller stage companies, I figure that's what more of the room was looking at, is for high growth startups. And growth is captured there by revenue over the past 3 years. So some interesting stuff there. Culture, career growth, so those things are always tough to figure out. And frankly, to be honest, it's really hard to figure that out until you're actually at the company. But we take our best guess while we're in the interview stage. Of course, if you have a friend at a company or somebody you trust, that is absolutely the best resource here. But let's assume that you don't have that. Between culture and career growth, I think Glassdoor is your best guess to get some like unfiltered feedback that isn't coming through the company's site. On product, I think company site's going to do a good job there, but if you don't know about the company and you're looking for companies with a certain product, then you might be looking at AngelList or something along the lines of that. Based off of all that information, you really want to think about developing a quick pitch so that you can kind of raffle it off. You're going to be asked a bunch of times what's important to you. I certainly ask everybody on my initial intro calls what's important. I just want to know, but outside of that, I also want to try to customize the process as best I can so that I can kind of address all of your needs throughout. But no question that you're going to be asked the question by me, other people in the interview process. And I don't harp on this too much, but certainly an inability to articulate what's important to you is, while you're actively looking for a company and a role, can be a little bit of a negative. So think through that before you start interviewing. The last one's pretty obvious, just about leveraging all the research that you've already done. You spend a lot of time looking at companies and products. Let that come through, let that show through in the questions that you prepared before you come into interview. So you've done a lot of this work, a lot of the pre-work, but now one of the hard parts is you actually have to get your foot in the door. So there's a couple different ways to do that. Obviously, the first one that's front and center is filling out an application. Everybody can always do that. It never hurts, but it's not necessarily the best way to do it. If you have somebody there, or a friend of a friend of a friend, that you can get introed into the company, that's certainly your best bet. Somebody in the department for which you want to join. Ideally, the hiring manager. If you could do that, that'd be great. But yeah, might not get that. But if you can't do that, see if you can get intro to a recruiter. I feel like sometimes a friend might not be willing to intro you to somebody in the department, but they should feel good about introing you to a recruiter. So that should at least get you that initial call. And that's really all you're asking for. You just want to get into the process so you can kind of sell yourself. Also, referrals. If you can get put through as a referral, that's great. Blue Apron, I think we're about 40% referrals, so obviously it's something that we heavily lean on. But if you do get put in as a referral, I'd also suggest that while you're imposing on that person, also get them to make an introduction via email with the same rules as before, because not necessarily the case with us, but there's a lot of big unwieldy systems, and you just don't want to get lost in the mix there. So why not also get set up with an introduction. So I just kind of like to be more in control of my fate there and say, give me a name so I can lock onto that person and just bug the hell out of them until I can get an interview. So let's assume you have no connections and you're just looking at the prospect of filling out an application. So that's great. Still do it. But also I'd recommend hopping on LinkedIn, looking up a job posting, and finding the listing recruiter and then sending them an email directly. LinkedIn strongly recommends that recruiters tie their profiles in with their job postings. And you can be assured that like every single recruiter ties in InMail and LinkedIn directly into their work inbox. So it's definitely going in there. Whether they respond might be a different thing, but you're getting the attention and you're definitely separating yourself from everybody else that's applying. I would think that it's like a couple of percentage points of people are actually sending a direct message to separate themselves from everybody else, if at all. So a lot of times nobody's doing that. So just think, there could be like 1,000 people in the job queue for that job, but maybe 10 people that actually directly message the recruiter. So just think about that. All right, so go into the process, try to gather as much information as possible. Take advantage of that recruiter call. Like, that's your call. Just own it a little bit. Recruiter's gonna ask you some questions, but you can be pretty aggressive about it. How many stages? What's required? Take home, presentation, case study? Maybe all three, hopefully not. Who's involved, senior leadership? Also, ask for a pay range to ensure that you're not wasting your time. Now, when you do that, don't feel pressure that you have to reciprocate with giving back your current pay or even your pay range. This will definitely make my job harder, but it's true. You shouldn't have to be pressured at that point. You probably get asked about it, but it's fair to say, look, this is our first call. I'm just learning about the role. Why don't we just let this thing play out a little bit? We can revisit this down the line. So it can be a little bit of a tough thing to do. You feel pressure. We do pressure you to give some kind of guidance, but it's okay to push back and say, no, let's do it later. So with all this stuff, some companies do like a much better job of talking through the process ahead of time, telling you what to expect, who you're gonna meet, how long it's gonna take, what's the commitment, but not everybody. So just because there's a lot of variance from one company to the next, one recruiter to the next, I'm trying to create a little bit of a framework here for you that you can take with every opportunity. So when you're looking at 5 different jobs, you can fairly compare them across the board, and you have all the data points that you need. All right, so as you're progressing through the interview, you want to pay attention to clues about how you're doing, especially if you're doing well. So are they adding additional sessions to your interview on the fly? Definitely happens a good amount. Be like, hey, you're going to be here for 4 hours, but can you stay for another 2 hours? Certainly a good sign. They wouldn't do that if they didn't like you. This one's a little bit weak, I'll acknowledge, but our interviewers talking about you in the future tense. It does happen sometimes with less experienced interviewers. Like, oh man, when you're here, you're gonna pick this up really quickly. The last one is definitely true. Are some interviewers appearing to be selling you more than interviewing you? So, maybe you have a lineup, who you're talking to, and towards the end of it, towards the latter half, you're like, well, I thought this was gonna be a little harder. And maybe the company's just not that good and it's not a tough interview, but I'd be willing to guess down the line, if you're doing really well, the first interviewer is telling the end interviewers like, hey, this person's really good, we really like him. Maybe you should just sell a little bit more. So if you're starting to feel that, that's a good sign that you're doing pretty well. So this is all just an important step in just assessing your value, which you can leverage a little bit when you get into negotiations. My bold statement here at the end would be, don't share your comp. It makes my job harder, but I say don't share your comp. You don't need to, at least not up front. Force the company to take the first step there. Like maintain that leverage, keep your cards really close to the vest. Also, this is a good time for you to just say, crazy timing here. Just last week, 6 days ago, new New York City law was enacted that makes it illegal for a recruiter or a company representative to ask you for your current compensation. However, you can still provide it if you so choose, but it's illegal for us to pressure you into answering that question. So that's another thing where you just might want to sit back and say, look, I don't really want to give any guidance. I don't want to give a range yet. Why don't you make me an offer that's fair and in line with this role? And the nice thing about that is you're just kind of withholding back until you have more data. So maybe you got this broad range on the recruiter call, but there's a lot of give in that. And if you can force the company to say, you make the first move, give me something that you think's worthwhile, then you have another really solid data point. That's a real number. That's been vetted through multiple stakeholders in the company. And then once you have that, so the danger if you come out of the gate and you say what you want, you might be in a situation where like you're underpaid, but maybe you don't know that. And you're shorting yourself a little bit of money that was gonna be left on the table. If they make an offer and it's less than you want, that's okay. You're kind of back where you were in the beginning. Then you can decide, say, okay, it's not what I wanted. Can you come back with something stronger? Or then at that point, now that you are equipped with more data, you can say, all right, I actually wanted 20% more than this. You think we can do that? So again, it's just kind of withholding a little bit until you have another data point. Last thing, is there room for negotiation? In short, yes. There's always something on the table a little bit. And this is my last slide here. I just wanted to end on this to show the importance of negotiations. Yes, it's a little bit more focused on recent grads, but the data holds true for subsequent job changes. This was actually just like the prettiest one I can find. So going left to right, and then I'm done. About a third of candidates negotiated, while 2/3 just took the first thing they got. 90% of companies never rescinded an offer because a candidate wanted to negotiate. I can certainly speak that I've never done that. That seems silly why you would do that. Men, a little bit more willing to negotiate than women. And then these last two numbers are crazy. So 74% of employers have room to increase, at least the offer by a little. That's nuts, just sitting there on the table for you. And then the last one, 80% of those who negotiated at least were partially successful. And I think that partially successful is successful in this case. You know, it's a negotiation, it's a compromise. You can't really expect to get everything out of it. But if you get something, just kind of maximizing the opportunity and the money that's on the table that's already there for you, that's all you really want to get out of these negotiations. So add this all up together, and you should negotiate. That's it. Thanks.